the mighty and resilient Merrimack River, carving through the communities of our great region. My name is Linda Lorden, proud president of Merrimack County Savings Bank, and like the river that serves as our namesake, we're a constant yet ever-changing presence. Because to us, it's bigger than banking. It's about powering communities and putting people first. It's about knowing where you came from and where you're going. That's Merrimack style. Visit us at themerrimack.com.
The views and opinions expressed by A Little Bit Culty are those of the hosts and don't reflect the official policy or position of the podcast, right, Sarah?
Correct.
Any of the, quote, fire content, I prefer lava content, provided by our guests, bloggers, sponsors, or authors are the opinion and are not intended to malign a religion, a group, a club, an organization, business individual, anyone or anything, unless, Sarah?
You're a douchebag.
Yeah, I mean, pretty much. Also, we're not doctors, psychologists, or wizards. We're just two non-experts trying to make you a friendly, informative podcast based on our experience that we've turned into wisdom. Okay?
Good talk.
Okay.
Hey, everybody. Sarah Edmondson here.
And I'm Anthony Ames, a.k.a. Nippy, Sarah's husband, and you're listening to
A Little Bit Culty,
a.k.a. ALBC, a podcast about what happens when devotion goes to the dark side.
We've been there and back again. A little about us. True story. We met and fell in love in a cult. And then we woke up and got the hell out of Dodge.
And the whole thing was captured in the HBO docuseries The Vow, now in its second season.
I also wrote about our experience in my memoir, Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life.
Look at us, a couple of married podcasters who just happen to have a weekly date night where we interview experts and advocates in things like cult awareness and mind control.
Wait. This does not count toward date night, babe. We got to schedule that. That's separate.
So there's 2 days we got to hang out?
We do this podcast thing because we learned a lot on our exit ramp out of NXIVM, still on that journey, and we want to pay the lessons forward with the help of other cult survivors and whistleblowers.
We know all too well that culty things happen. It happens to people every day across every walk of life. So join us each week to tackle these culty dynamics, everywhere from online dating to mega churches and multi-level marketing.
This stuff really is everywhere. The cultiverse just keeps on expanding, and so are we. Welcome to Season 5 of A Little Bit Culty, serving cult content and word salads weekly on your favorite podcast platforms. Learn more at alittlebitculty.com.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, hanging on to the wind, my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
All right, we're back with a long-awaited episode. One of my personal heroes, Isabella Constantino.
So excited to finally be able to share our conversation with all of you. For those of you who don't know, Isabella was in season 2 of The Vow, and she's one of the subjects that was followed in regards to the Tourette study.
Which a documentary was made about called My Tourettes. So obviously, if you guys have followed Keith claimed a lot of stuff. One of those claims was that through unlicensed human subject research, i.e. not legitimate, they're able to successfully treat Tourette syndrome.
According to the CDC, Tourette syndrome, which you might know as TS, is a condition of the nervous system. TS causes people to have tics, and tics are sudden twitches, movements, or sounds that people do repeatedly. People who have tics cannot stop their body from doing these things.
One patient of the doctor of these studies claimed that NXIVM had taught him to overcome Tourette's.
So whether or not he actually cured Tourette's, well, you're smart enough to figure that out on your own. Today's guest, Isabella, was drawn to NXIVM thanks to this study and the bogus claims. And just for the record, so many people have reached out to us since season 2, and just like people who are in this field, not only explaining how these studies weren't legit, but like all the steps people have to go through to do a study.
Mm-hmm. Even just being peer reviewed,
yeah,
is one.
There's all these hoops you have to jump through to make it legitimate, and they did none of it.
This was Keith's number one strategy: avoid anything that has legitimate standards and practices. Which is why anytime I got close, and this happened a lot, Tuck Business School, which is Dartmouth Business School, Harvard Business School, a lot of people that were alumni of these things were like, we should get some of these things into the school. And anytime someone came down to do it, to have an interview or something, Keith always change the parameters under which it would be required for it to be appropriate for them. Well, they should do a 5-day. They should do all these things. And obviously, he was making demands that none of these schools would yield to.
So Isabella Constantino is an artist with Tourette syndrome. She got in touch with ESP to be a part of the research they were doing, hoping to find some relief.
This led to Isabella postponing her last semester of college, moving to Albany, and immersing herself in NXIVM for the next 3 years.
Now, having left in 2017, Isabella is continuing to renew her sense of self and navigate a healing mental health journey post-life in a cult.
I'm personally thrilled to be connecting with Isabella after all this time and hopefully help her on her journey, which in turn would help us on ours. We connected at the trial, and that was the last time I saw her physically. So without further ado,
Isabella Constantino. Enjoy. Hello, my dear Isabella.
Hi, Sarah. How are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm good.
Yeah. How are you doing? How is your life? How is your heart?
I'm okay. I feel like it's been a very long 5 or so years.
Yes.
Yeah. I feel like it's been like very chaotic at times and it feels almost sometimes equally stagnant as it is like chaotic. And I don't always know how to go about the day.
I can totally relate to that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
I want to get so much into like what you're doing and your healing and catch up and everything on the last almost 6 years now. End of May we knew, but we didn't like make a stink till the beginning of June.
Right.
No, I remember.
Yeah.
Yes.
You were there.
It's well documented.
I was there. Yeah. Actually, I was at the intensive that Nippy, came in and yelled at Lauren at, and I had no idea that you did that until I left and other people told me about it because they covered it up so quickly.
Really?
I was working at, I don't know. Yeah. I don't know if I was in the basement or like prepping food or what I was doing, but I just remember coming out and everyone was like, we have to move half of these chairs because everyone, like half the people left. I had no idea what was going on. I remember someone whispered to me, like half the board just like left. Apparently, Mark's going to make movies and we don't know who's going to fill them in. And I was like, okay, that's weird, but like good for them. I don't know what's going on. And then it just got increasingly like dark and controlling from there on out, just with everyone leaving. It was very chaotic.
Well, I'll let you know. I'll let you in a little secret because I was debating what I was going to do, and one of the things I was going to do was kind of make a stink in the room where the egg trays are, where they line up all those eggs every morning and those things, and I was going to flip them,
Yeah,
and just be obnoxious, and really I was just sounding the alarm. But all I kept thinking about was the people that had nothing to do with this that were going to have to clean up my mess.
it was me.
You would have had to clean up the eggs that I flipped. So
then I would have heard about it.
Yes, I'm especially.
So maybe it would have been a good thing.
I'm especially glad I didn't do that because that would have been on you and a couple other people I didn't want to put through unpaid labor. So
More unpaid labor.
Too.
Yeah. So
A lot of eggs and a lot of unpaid labor.
right.
Now, I know that most of our listeners will have watched The Vow and they will have seen you and know who you are. And if there's an off chance that some new person has just come to our podcast and we're interviewing Isabella Constantino, do you want to give us a little mini cliff notes on your brief foray in NXIVM?
Yeah, my elevator
Let me ask
pitch.
you this, actually. How did Mark Elliott find you? How did you hear about it?
So Mark didn't find me. I got enrolled because, my senior year of college, I, had been doing pretty well mostly before that. But then I think with the stress of, not knowing what the future was, change coming, anything else that was going on, my tics had gotten pretty bad. And we had always tried everything we could to help, alternative medicines, everything. And I was pretty involved with the Tourette's Syndrome Association in Western New York. And so I was volunteering at a conference that is every 2 years in New York State. And that year was in Buffalo. And the first day is for teachers and there's a panel and teachers learn about that. And the second day is for the families. So I volunteered to watch all the kids so that their parents could watch the doctors and learn about different types of treatments and stuff like that. So I was at that conference, which the director of the Tourette's film ended up, driving to. And my mom was there. And one of the doctors who we'd known for a long time during his presentation, I'd known him for 10 years. I was actually connected through the ABC documentary I did when I was like 13. And we stayed in touch. And he said during his speech that he was really just impressed and, thought it was great that me and my mom never stopped looking for treatment and that we were trying so many things, and just kind of commended our resilience in that way. And Alessandro heard that. And, I think, and basically he approached my mom, and he had meant to, I think, approach one other person, but they asked him to leave because they didn't really know what it was, or maybe they did and thought it was sketchy.
Oh, they asked him to leave.
Yeah, they asked him, and I think one other person went with him. It wasn't Mark, but basically that weekend, my mom said to me, hey, do you remember, actually, I'd seen Mark speak at a previous conference when I was in high school. And she goes, do you remember that guy we saw speak in Syracuse? And he had the tics and spoke about compassion. I was like, yeah, I remember him. She was like, well, he got involved with this company and he was able to have success in treating his Tourette's. Would you be interested? And I said, absolutely. And so basically that weekend, I ended up talking with Mark on a Zoom call with my parents. And he kind of told us a little bit about NXIVM or ESP. And he told us, there's articles out there, don't believe them, it's fine. And I didn't believe them because I, trusted it. I was naive. I was, 20 and pretty sheltered. And basically just throughout the next few weeks, I got connected with him and then did another interview with Brandon. And then basically a few weeks later, I was on a Zoom call in my dorm room with Mark, Brandon, and Nancy, and, ticking pretty badly, basically saying like, yes, I would do anything to get rid of this. Like I'm desperate. And I think that, and the fact that my tics were so noticeable, and I had already had previous like documentary footage about my experience and my symptoms and all of that, made me a good candidate. And basically everyone hopped off the Zoom call, and Mark said, I can't guarantee anything, but I think you got it. And I just remember hopping off and just being so happy and just like, honestly, just like breaking down, because I had been the first time in my life I'd given up hope on getting better. And I was just ecstatic. And then a few weeks later, I worked with Nancy, and that's how I got connected.
Wow. So you were really wanting it.
Yeah, and it all happened very fast within the matter of like a month and a half. So yeah, the film crew came the day after I turned 21, and they were supposed to come the day of, which I'm glad they didn't, because they wanted to film at the bar and just like, oh, experience. It was, best that they did not do that. But they came the next day, and that's when we filmed the initial footage for the My Tourette's movie. And then I did a sleep study that weekend, and a couple weeks later, I drove basically with my mom, like straight after my last exam, to Albany, and I worked with Nancy for a week or so and came back.
What was that like? What were your first impressions?
Well, I had met Mark and I had met the film crew, and they were all great. Like I really loved them. And up until that point, it had been a really good experience. It was a little stressful doing like preliminary like questions with Brandon, who was the doctor in the study, just because, it's, he was asking like the severity of tics and different symptoms. And that was, stressful, because that was a normal type of stressful. So nothing had stood out as a red flag, because, talking about that can be difficult. It wasn't out of the ordinary. But once I got there, actually the center had flooded that week or two before that, or like maybe that week. So instead of driving to the center, we kind of rerouted halfway through and went to Nancy's house instead. And they didn't want to introduce me to Nancy initially. They wanted to get kind of the pre-testing data, and then I would meet her the next day on camera and everything. So I spent like 2-3 hours in Nancy's basement with Brandon, all hooked up and everything. And that was, for quite a while, that was the hardest part. until like kind of the abusive aspects got really bad. That was the thing I looked back on, because it just, they basically asked you, they're trying to get data on where my tics and where my body and where my brain was at pre-NXIVM, pre-curriculum, and asking me to do think about different things, ask certain questions, maybe like, I don't remember, like hold my breath for 5 seconds, breathe for 5 seconds, try not to tick for 2 minutes, and just things that would just, is already stressful, is already like an unknown environment to me. There's a lot going on. So it was pretty hard. So it kind of went in a little difficult. I was a little on edge, but I was very excited. So the next day when I met Nancy, I was very optimistic. And you can see they had it on film, on camera, when I was talking with Mark and my mom and Nancy. My mom asked me, do I have any fears? And I said, no, because this is, I've had Tourette since I was like 6 or 7. This has been the thing that we've been looking for, since then. And then I felt pretty stupid the next few years, because like, you're scared of everything. And I was like, wow, I was so naive then when I said I wasn't scared. But realistically, God, it just got shittier from there.
Yeah, I was going to ask, like, was it hope that they sold you on? Like, did you think that you were going to get through this? Like, was that, you said Mark said he couldn't guarantee anything, but what was, like, you must have gone in thinking, I'm at this level. Ideally, I want to get what? Like, what was the kind of dream or the hope that you were hoping to come out of it with? And how much was that sold to you?
So there had been 4 or 5 people on the study before me, including Mark. So they already had results. So it wasn't like completely this unknown hypothetical thing. There's already people who were doing significantly better. And at that point, I was doing worse than I had been in years. So any form of relief from that would have been just welcomed and ideal. But, I was always very, hopeful and optimistic. And, never did I think in my life, like, I will have this my whole life. That is just, I just have it. That's the only thing. That's the only option. It was always, there will be something that I can do, or someday I will wake up and I will not have this. And I didn't think that I would really be the one to do that myself. So when this was put in front of me, this was the only thing that we'd ever seen like this. And the only people I'd seen after being involved with the Tourette's community for so long who'd had results like this. So I was just, is the unknown, but it was a better unknown than, what I knew I could access before.
This is the golden age of cult recovery. The more we speak up and share our stories, the more we realize we are not alone. Your voice and your story can empower others. This is Sarah, and I'm proud to be a founding collaborator of the #IGotOut movement. Learn more at igotout.org.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
The Frankies were a picture-perfect influencer family, but everything wasn't as it seemed.
I just had a 12-year-old boy show up here asking for help. He's emaciated. He's got tape around his legs. Ruby Frankie is his mom's name.
Infamous is covering Ruby Frankie, the world of Mormonism, and a secret therapy group that ruined lives. Listen to Infamous wherever you get your podcasts.
So from that point, when did it start to just fade?
Well, like I said, I was very young. And because of the Tourette's, I was sheltered in a lot of ways. Like, I didn't start driving till a couple years after that. There's a lot that, because I was so focused on all the neurological stuff, the Tourette's, the OCD, the ADHD, it was very debilitating. I think I was ahead in certain ways from having to deal with that, and behind in other ways from not, just having to focus on that instead of other things. So I did not have maybe a good sense of what was not okay in a workplace or in a, corporate environment, or just because I was young, I was used to adults treating me like I was young. And they treated me like I was young. They treated me like I was very out of touch and very naive. And when I voiced from the very beginning what I was uncomfortable with or my own thoughts, like I think it was probably similar to a lot of people's experiences in NXIVM with the curriculum, in that if you didn't go along with the curriculum, there's something wrong with that, or you're being defiant, you're being attention seeking, you're being whatever.
Your issues were always leveraged.
Your issues came up. Yeah. All that.
Your issues were leveraged to make you obedient.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I said this in my victim statement, which I sent Sarah last night, actually.
Read it.
Yeah.
Very well written, by the way.
Yes, by the way.
Thank you. I wasn't going to write one, actually. And then 2 days before, I was like, shit, I should write one.
You have a lot to say, just so you know.
I have a lot to say. Well, I mentioned in that just working with Nancy broke me, and it broke me very fast. She was very good at being very hot and very cold, and you think it's you, and not just her being inappropriate in a professional environment. Because I'd never really been in a professional environment, so I assumed it was normal on some level, or I was doing something wrong. And they addressed the tics and any symptoms I had like it was, the way that they explained it to me was, so ESP is a personal growth company, but it's also a human ethics company. It's all of these things where you have this thing that you want to meet, and then you have to look at where you're holding yourself back. And you have, they said your body values and you have your ideology. So if you're upholding body, you're not holding up your ideology, and vice versa. So because all of this was so intertwined, the curriculum was, so much a part of the study outside of the EMs, they were using all of the concepts in the curriculum to address my tics and my symptoms.
Yeah, no, I can see where that can get abusive really quickly. And can I take a moment to flesh out what you just said so our audience understands? I'll give a kind of layman's example, and then I can see how that layman's example can be leveraged to abuse you as I'm hearing it. The example they gave is if you're sitting on your couch and you have the ideal self as being in shape, and you want to go to the gym, and you think of going to the gym, but the bag of Doritos feels better. When you indulge in the bag of Doritos, you're indulging your body, and your ideology, which is this person to eat well and stay in shape, is being, quote, breached against. And at the same time, if you go to the gym and uphold your ideology, you're breaching what your body wants, which feels good. Eating the Doritos in the moment feels good. So basically what I'm talking about is short-term thinking versus long-term thinking. So if I have a tic, this is what I think happened is, if I have a tic or I'm doing something that's of my body, right? And I indulge it, right? And I have this ideology of a person without Tourette's, you're ripe for abuse based on accepting the premise of the curriculum. And I think that's what's been leveraged, and you got shamed and all that stuff. So,
it was terrible.
Does that help?
That's perfectly accurate.
Okay.
I assumed I was the worst person in the world because I was just giving into this all the time.
That's awful.
It was so bad, yeah. And the thing was, I was going off meds at the same time at their request, and I was, there's so many unhealthy things that were normalized in the community that, I just fell into, that are terrible things for anyone, but let alone, especially if you have neurological issues.
Neurological issues.
The lack of sleep, the lack of food, all of these things are things that I'm still struggling with, but make my tics, make my OCD so terrible. Just sleep is one of the things that is just so important for keeping your neurological system regulated, and everything, absolutely everything about NXIVM is just one thing after another that just dysregulates you and just compounds on each other. And then you're just like, what the fuck is going on? I literally don't even know what's up and what's down and what my body is saying. And because of just all of the self-doubt they instilled in everyone, it was very hard to tell both in NXIVM and coming out of it, like as you're trying to heal, as you're trying to just get through the day, what is your intuition and what's them? So it's just all of these, it was very difficult.
Well, so you have unqualified people without standards and practices and degrees constantly throwing shrapnel into your central nervous system, and people that are supposed to be helping you attain this hope that you came in under the guise of, and maybe a couple of examples of people who have done it, but really what they've been able to endure is the shrapnel in their central nervous system and put on a good face of obedience and control their own tics. It's essentially the gist of it.
Yeah. And I think Mark Vicente actually, so I haven't listened to a lot of NXIVM related material or podcasts and stuff. Just I've limited what I've exposed myself to just for my own mental health.
Smart.
Thank you. But I listened to Mark Vicente's summary of episode 3 of season 2, the one that focused on the Tourette study in the vow. And there's a point in his podcast where he makes a metaphor with the Tourette study. It's like if someone's sneezing or coughing, for a very long time and they can't stop and they just keep coughing, and no matter what they do, they can't stop. Someone holds a gun to their head, they might be able to stop, but that's not really sustainable long term. And I think that's what a lot of us were dealing with. And no one, to my knowledge, actually did stop ticking. Even Mark, when I left, I don't know if anyone else would know it if they didn't know Tourette's very well, but, you could still see he was having symptoms. I was having symptoms. We're all still dealing with it on some level.
Do you have a theory on that for Mark? Like, do you think, because he was like the first, right? Do you have a theory on what his success came from? Like, do you think it was the same as yours? Like, because, in the documentary, whatever methods they use, good or bad, it did seem like you had some big shifts.
I did. Yeah. So I think my experience and Mark's were very different in a lot of ways. I went to Albany for a week thinking that would be it. And I start working with Nancy, the EMs, and the curriculum and everything. And I think, okay, I'm going to leave and that's going to be it. I'm going to do better. But when on the last day, I remember feeling very emotional and, feeling very confused by the nature of the curriculum and the fact that now I just had all these concepts and, ideas about myself and about my tics and trying to figure out and feel very angry and defensive. And I just remember in that last day working with Nancy, her and Mark sat down with me and, we're going to keep in touch. Don't worry, we're not going to leave you. And I was surprised by that because I thought that was it. But a month later, so this is kind of introducing or explaining how my experience was different than Mark's. A month later, I went there for a couple of days to do an EM with Nancy, and they asked me to move there. So I ended up deciding, this has been the only thing that works. I don't want to leave school, but I think this is worth it. So basically Valentine's Day, 2015, I drive up with my parents and my sister. They move me in and I'm there for 6 months. And my experience of being in Albany was very quick, very unexpected, and very kind of extreme in the way that all of my experiences in those first 6 months and on the study were either very difficult, kind of abusive or toxic in nature, being around a lot of people in curriculum-based situations, or very isolated. And I kind of had a very strange and very fast introduction to all the NXIVM curriculum, to the Tourette study, to having any success I had put on a pedestal, or having this idea of what my symptoms should look like and being told, like, you need to be like this. There's people before me that I went in pretty all or nothing to NXIVM. And I was very young and I was asked to go on or off of medication. I didn't drive. I didn't know anyone. I didn't have a job. I didn't have money. Basically most of the food money my parents gave me to be there was going towards train tickets each month to go home for the sleep study because they wanted it in the same place every month. So it was just like there's all these different ways that I didn't have any autonomy. And
They didn't pay for you to travel for the sleep study that they wanted?
No. Actually, so I
Those
lived
fuckers.
with Nan. I know. And I lived with
Jesus.
Nancy's assistant, and my parents, paid for me to live there and paid for rent and everything. But I didn't know I could ask for, them to pay for that. And I think my last month there, it occurred to me, and I asked Mark, and he said he would ask Claire, but they said that because I didn't ask until then, they can only reimburse me for the next one or the very last one that I did. So yeah, so I didn't have
Fucking
any money.
assholes.
That's
I know.
the thing that pissed me off about that place. There's a chaps my ass for you.
That chaps my ass. You relocate. You pay for yourself to relocate. They don't give you a job. You have to pay yourself to go back to your hometown to do the sleep study in the same place.
Yeah, for 2 days and then come back, So I got to see my family a day out of the month and sleep. Oh, it was so, I would basically go to sleep at like 7 p.m. All this shit hooked up every month. I
Oh,
got to
my
know the
God.
sleep study people here in Buffalo very well. They're great. But-
So you're like sleeping in an office? You're sleeping at a hospital for the sleep study? Where do you sleep for
Yeah,
that?
hospital. So yeah, you go in and we have a really good sleep center here. So I'd go in, I get hooked up. Like Brandon sent them all the like types of like tests that or like the information he wanted from them. And they counted the tics in my sleep, I guess. The thing is, I don't tick in my sleep. I'm asleep. So on some level, I can't know that. But for me, tics are, I'm just going on a tangent a little bit, but tics are super a conscious decision for the most part. Like I have these urges and I respond to them. And that's kind of what the NXIVM curriculum used to say, well, that's a choice instead of,
God.
very oversimplifying it. But I know I don't tick in my sleep because my entire life I have not wanted to get up in the morning because sleep was the only time I didn't tick. That state between sleep and awake when you're conscious enough to be there, but still in the kind of relaxed, place that your body is not dealing with all of everything else it might deal with during the day. So basically I went there every month for sleep studies. They said I improved a lot. I don't know what little movements or brain things they were basing that off of, but they said I ticked a lot in my sleep. I think they just didn't have a very good way of measuring that. But I would go there, back and forth every month and then just be alone other than intensives. And there was a group of young people that first 6 months when I lived in Albany. So sometimes I was around people and I made friends and met good people. But for the most part, I was very, very alone in Barb J's house. And there was no sidewalks. I didn't have a car. I didn't drive. I, kept asking. Nancy kept saying she would find work for me, but she didn't, and she would never respond, and all of that.
So wait a minute. Nancy made a promise she didn't keep?
I know.
That's so
Strange.
fucking strange. I can't imagine that.
Yeah.
Hey there, listener. Hope you're enjoying this episode and that you're taking deep breaths when we cover the enraging stuff that cult jerks are up to. Let it out, as in the yoga practice. Inhale positivity, exhale negativity. That's for you, Sarah. We got this. No hulking it out, all you little hulksters. And if you need some helpful resources on the topic of cult recovery, check out our website at alittlebitculty.com. And now, here's a brief message from our sponsors.
Meals bring people together, but for many families, providing their next meal can be a challenge. You can help by participating in Macy's annual Feeding the Hungry food drive. All proceeds go toward local food banks and families. Now through January 31st, you can purchase an icon in-store or online, or watch out for the blue Feeding the Hungry shelf tags, where a portion of your purchase will be donated to local pantries. Together, we can combat hunger in our local communities at Macy's.
Marcus was different, right? Because he didn't go there to get his Tourette's cured. He went for his career and being a speaker, and then his Tourette sort of went away over time. Is that right?
Yeah.
I can tell you my experience with Mark. I think it's an interesting story and somewhat relevant.
Tell it.
So they started the study, and he was going up there a lot. And Sarah and I, had a place up there, but we weren't there but 3 or 4 times a year. And I had a car up there, and I would let him use my car. And I was coming back up to Albany from New York City, and he was going from Albany down to New York City, and we decided to meet at the train station and get my key back. so he didn't have to park it. And he was leaving a train roughly at the time I got in. And we had about 30 minutes to kill, and we went to the cafe, and I'm sitting there with my hands in the key back, and I notice he's not fucking ticking. And I go, wait a minute, Mark. He's like, he starts nodding, and his eyes are welling up. And I'm like, dude, you're not, and I had the goosebumps. I was just like, oh my God, because I was there. I saw it. And listen, the people that say they faking Tourette's and all that, he wasn't faking Tourette's. I met him years ago. He took a 5-day, and he went back to his speaking career. And one of the whole things, and I've said this before, part of one thing I feel like I need to see through is get the Elliott brothers out, because I was very instrumental in getting the Elliott brothers involved in the organization, particularly when Mark wanted to get Brian more involved in the organization and quit using it peripherally. So I have a personal relationship to this, and I'm sitting there and I'm crying. I'm going, oh my God, he's like, it's 90% gone. Like I don't, and I had seen him like not long ago, and he was like, doing his head and his jaw and all that stuff. And it was like, and so for me, when he handed the key back to me, and I was like, good God, dude, we are onto something. This is amazing. Like well, I doubled down, seeing him, and like, I didn't, Mark's taking a beating in certain media corners right now because he's doubled down on something that's clearly, the wrong way to go about it. But I think he's misguided now. I don't think it comes from, bad person, bad place, bad heart. And seeing that and seeing him embrace it and seeing him go out and be kind of an ambassador for this change allowed me to kind of, like, my doubts kept getting squelched. And that was a big moment for me when I saw someone who couldn't stand still for a minute give me the key back to my car, and it didn't have it. And I was relating to him in a totally new way. And he's like, the world's different. I don't have to go in and explain myself everywhere I go. And it's like a totally different, like, it's a powerful moment. And I thought, like, it reaffirmed what I was doing, because I was always kind of in a state of like, is this going to work?
He didn't have anybody doing to him what was done to you, I don't think, right? Or did he?
So I don't think he had never considered himself a part of the study, because he went in a very organic way, in a way that just happened to have results with his tics in. And so with me and the other people involved in the study, it was a much more directed approach and much more, I think, intense and focused on the tics themselves, where I think he probably, at least at the beginning and for a while, had a really positive experience with everything. Like people say, like, once you move to Albany for the NXIVM stuff, it gets very controlling. It gets very dark. It's like people start failing. People were not doing well.
Well, the abuse rears its head.
Yeah.
The abuse comes out.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. And it's much more easier, obviously, or was, for Keith to pull all the strings.
Well, you're closer to the abuser.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think maybe Mark being in New York, Mark living his life between intensives, him working with Nancy, and this, like, if he worked with Nancy, it was this very maybe novel thing. And I don't know what his sessions with her looked like. Obviously, I wasn't there for any of them. But I think having more autonomy before that, more life experience, more ability to gain space and use the tools in a natural way between intensives gave him the ability to have a much healthier experience with it than I think I did, who just went all in for 6 months in a weird place, going off meds, like, disassociating, just dealing with all the things that I dealt with. He didn't have that. And on top of that, I think, and I don't know how it was before I joined, but when I was there, it was, I think, becoming increasingly misogynistic. And with the Jeunesse curriculum coming out, from what I understand about it, I did the weekends and stuff like that, never the intensives. But I think they carried a lot of that over into working with me at times, and just telling me how much of a bubble I had been in my whole life, and how I was let off the hook for so many things, and how I was trying to control the people around me with my behavior and attention seeking and certain things that I don't know if they were true or not, that I think they worked through or put on Mark when they worked with him in terms of being attention seeking. So I think because that's what narrative they put around his Tourette's, it kind of like trickled down and became very much a part of ours, like a focus in ours. at least in my experience with Nancy, they were adamant that I had been in a bubble my whole life. And don't get me wrong, like I was sheltered on some levels. My parents were a bit protective because I was dealing with all of this. So I think a lot of things were difficult.
Which incidentally is irrelevant.
It is irrelevant.
Right.
Good point. So I think we just had different experiences.
Okay, I was just thinking about how, like, I wasn't around so much when Mark came, but I do remember that. I mean, listen, we all got in trouble for being attention seekers, myself included. We all had our things.
I got in trouble for being an attention avoider.
Oh, yeah.
You can't
We got
win.
in trouble for being defiant.
I just leave.
Yeah. But, attention seeking, being a ham. And my theory kind of was that if you break, because, people do things for attention. That is something that happens, and that my theory was that, not being a doctor, of course, is that part of Mark's Tourette's may have been reinforced by the attention he got. That was just my theory. And then when that got sort of pulled apart and that disintegration was
exposed,
then he could just like be himself and not try to get attention that way. Great. But then to put that on you, it's just like, it's so there's so many things about this that chat my ass, just like how irresponsible that is. And then also just this, bullshit study where they're having you come. I mean, I'm even shocked they even did the sleep study properly, because everything else seemed completely like a hack job.
It seemed like the sleep study might have been a hack job also.
Oh, really?
Because I don't know, I don't know how they were interpreting the data. Like, basically the whole thing was just kind of things to make it look legitimate that they probably thought were legitimate. But really, there was no variables. There was no control group. There was no ethics board. There was no things that studies should have, on top of the fact that they were claiming long-term success after very short-term results. And I had been doing better for a week, and they're like, basically, you're cured, and then held me to that. Like Carissa, I know that she stayed in Albany for like 2 or 3 weeks. Like she dealt with so much while she was there, just, on the study with Nancy. And I think everything just had gotten just more and more abusive. At least that was my experience during those last few years. And she, she's still dealing with the effects of that.
This podcast is brought to you by Citizens of Sound, a podcast production agency committed to developing and launching shows with gravity and depth. From conception to launch, Citizens will partner with you every step of the way, whether you're an actor, business owner, doctor, fitness coach, hairstylist, or influencer. Connection is the future of communication. Jump on board with Citizens of Sound today and start your show. Go to citizensofsound.com and follow them on Instagram. And trust me, it'll be a really good decision for you.
Thank you, everybody, for tuning in for this week's episode with our personal hero, Isabella Constantino. Stay tuned for part 2 coming very soon. Thanks for your patience, and thank you for supporting A Little Bit Culty.
Sinking down to the depths of the ocean, I'm hanging on to the weight of my love. If I let go of it all, I could leave, but I know I won't.
Hope you like this episode. Let's keep the conversation going and come hang out with us on Patreon, where we keep the tape rolling each week with special episodes just for Patreon subscribers, and where we get deep into the weeds of unpacking every episode of The Vow.
And if you're looking for our show notes or some sweet, sweet swag or official ALBC podcast merch or a list of our most recommended cult recovery resources, visit our website at alittlebitculty.com.
And for more background on what brought us here, check out Sarah's page-turning memoir. It's called Scarred, the true story of how I escaped NXIVM, the cult that bound my life. It's available on Amazon, Audible, narrated by my wife, and at most bookstores.
A Little Bit Culty is a Talkhouse podcast and a Trace 120 production. We're executive produced by Sarah Edmondson and Anthony Nippy Ames, with writing, research, and additional production support by senior producer Jess Tardy. We're edited, mixed, and mastered by our rocking producer Will Rutherford of Citizens of Sound, and our amazing theme song, Cultivated, is by John Bryant and co-written by Nigel Asselin. Thank you for listening.